Okay, so one of the main things that we're going to do in this class, and really any philosophy class, is to talk about arguments. I know there's this idea that philosophy is just people throwing out their grand sounding opinions, speculating about whatever. And it's not really. Or at least there's a lot more to it than that. In philosophy, you need to be able to make a good argument for what you're saying. And one of the things that I really hope you get out of a philosophy class is to learn how to make arguments yourself that are good, but also to evaluate the arguments of others, to see if they are, in fact, good arguments or not. So that's what I want to do, or at least start to do in these first few lectures, just to talk a little bit about forms of argument. This stuff is going to go by pretty quickly. There's a lot here. You don't need to, completely have everything here down backwards and forwards the first time through it. I just want you guys to become acquainted with a lot of this stuff so it's not completely new when we start to use these ideas, use this material, use the skills I hope you see at work here later in the semester. Okay. So the first question I want to talk about is, what is an argument? Or at least, what is an argument in the sense that we're going to talk about it in a philosophy class? Look, a lot of words have different senses, different meanings. Argument is one of those words, right? Two guys on cable news just insulting each other, taking cheap shots at each other, will often call that an argument, right? It is one of the definitions, I would guess. A couple making a scene, that couple we, if they're around, we all try not to see them. We all pretend they're not there. We've probably all been in a restaurant or somewhere where that's happening. It's like, I'm going to pretend that nothing at all is happening over there and that there are no people there who are embarrassing themselves and making me feel embarrassment for them simply by what they're doing, right? That's not what we mean by an argument in philosophy either. What we mean by an argument is to try to give reasons in support of some claim. When you make an argument, you give reasons to think that that claim is true. Reasons that someone should accept that claim. Usually, the most common purpose of an argument is, we'll offer an argument trying to convince another person, give them reasons to believe something or do something. We give them an argument, right? There are other reasons we might make arguments, right? We might ask ourselves, we might have a belief ourselves and say, well, is this really justifiable? Do I have good reasons for it? Well, let's see what kind of an argument I actually have for it. We might look at the argument for our own beliefs in examining whether we should really hold them or accept them, right? We'll do a lot of that in this class, right? We might play devil's advocate. We might see what kind of arguments we can make for a claim or belief we don't accept at all, that we might even think is kind of crazy, right? We'll do a lot of that in this class too. There's going to be some claims that I'm going to guess that you're going to think are completely nuts. We'll see how good an argument we can give for them. And with those, we might decide, well, there's a good argument for it. Maybe this claim that's nuts, we should accept. But even if we don't, we'll see. If you see what kind of argument there is for a claim, maybe you can better understand the reasoning of other people, right? So, argument gives reasons to support a claim. Main reasons that we're going to make arguments, usually to convince other people. There are other reasons, to understand our own beliefs better, to see how justified we are in holding them, to also examine the reasons others have for their beliefs, right? Okay. And of course, there's also just making arguments for the sheer intellectual fun of it. Philosophers do this a lot. Other people find that less fun than we do. That kind of annoys them sometimes, right? Anyway. So hopefully you guys get a better sense of what an argument is. If I'm just insulting someone, if I'm just saying, well, only an idiot would believe that, you people in your political party or whatever, that's not an argument. That's just abuse, right? If I give them a reason to think it's true, or I give reasons to others to think it's true, that's an argument in the sense that we're interested in argument in a philosophy class. Some reasons to think a claim is true. Here is an example of an argument. It's a really long one. It's a really complicated one. Most of the ones we'll look at are going to be simpler, but this is just the one that kind of occurred to me. I don't know why. So I thought I would, write it out. We shouldn't let students take classes in economics to satisfy their gen ed requirements in science. Real sciences can make accurate predictions in the area they study. Chemists can predict what happens when you combine two chemicals. Astronomers can predict things like eclipses and where the planets will be in the sky. And meteorologists can predict tomorrow's weather. But economists can't make accurate predictions about the economy. They can't even tell you when the next recession will start or what the stock market will close at tomorrow. So economics isn't a real science, which is why an econ class shouldn't satisfy a science requirement, right? Accept it, don't accept it, think it's a good argument, think it's a bad argument. I don't actually think this is a good argument, but it is an argument, right? The argument gives a bunch of claims in support of a conclusion. Conclusion is we shouldn't let students take classes in economics because to satisfy science requirements, because it doesn't satisfy what this argument claims are the standards that a real science has to satisfy. Might be true, might be false. Who knows? But it's giving you reasons to accept this claim. This is a lot different than if someone were just to personally insult economists, right? You guys are dumb, you dress badly, you're all mean, you don't understand human beings. Just think of any kind of insult you can level at, economists. That's not an argument, even if, we might see stupid stuff like this called arguments on Fox or CNN. Giving people reasons to accept a claim, that's an argument. Personal abuse isn't, right? If we're talking about how people dress, I don't think philosophers have any claim to insult anybody on dressing badly. If you don't believe me, look up David Chalmers sometime. Very famous philosopher. I feel like Chalmers is the anti-GQ, right? Whatever he does, you probably shouldn't dress that way if you're a guy. Pretty much every philosopher, most of the famous ones, not great for grooming and dressing. I feel like I'm in the higher echelons of philosophers as far as this go, but the bar is set so very low. Anyway, that's not an argument, that's personal abuse, but whatever. All right. Not setting maybe the best example for y'all, I suppose. Anyway, back to actual argument. So, how do we evaluate arguments? There are a few different methods. There are actually a lot of different methods. I'm only going to talk about a few in these introductory lectures. The first is to distill an argument, and we'll talk a lot more about that in the next lecture. There's also diagramming or mapping arguments. I'm going to mention that. I'm not really going to go in any great detail there. Diagramming arguments is actually a pretty good way to understand them. It's honestly pretty pretty great sometimes for teasing apart arguments. It gets really kind of complicated, though. If you ever take my logic class, we will spend a lot of time doing argument diagramming or mapping. I think it's a cool thing to do. I think it's an interesting thing to do. I don't want to spend an entire month on argument in intro. This isn't a logic class, so I'm not really going to talk much about it. Do know that that's another way to evaluate arguments, and often a pretty good one, even though due to time constraints, I'm not going to talk a lot about it. Another thing to do is to ask what kind of argument it is. You don't have to strictly take these different methods, 1, 2, 3, 4, but I do kind of put them in this order because I do think it's maybe often a good way to go through kind of this as different steps, right? So, often, once you've distilled it, or even as you're distilling it, ask yourself, is it inductive or deductive? And we'll talk a lot more in a few lectures about what an inductive argument is and what a deductive argument is. I'll say a lot more about it when we have our discussion section. We'll talk about how to distinguish them. But I would just say, first step here, if you remember proofs from geometry class or proofs in mathematics, if you've taken those kind of math classes, those are deductive arguments. Arguments in the sciences, arguments about what usually happens, are inductive. All right, that might not make a lot of sense to you guys. If it doesn't, just hold on. I promise I will come back to this and talk a lot more about inductive and deductive arguments. If it's deductive, is it valid or not? I will also talk about that very soon. Validity is a very specialized concept in philosophy. We mean a very specific thing by it. I'll say more about that in a few lectures. Finally, look at the premises. Now, ideally, an argument would have premises that are obviously true. At best, always try to have premises that are completely true, that there's no doubt about. But look, in the real world, a lot of times we're not sure, right? We think a premise is true, we're very confident it's true, but we might admit there's some room for doubt, right? Well, if that's the case, try to have premises that at the very least aren't controversial. And I'll talk more about this, but the idea is a premise that isn't controversial is a premise that you are very confident is true, and you also think that an average person, a random person off the street, would also accept it as true. Finally, can they be challenged via a reductio argument? Can you challenge the premises? Premises are, we give this series of statements that supports this final statement, the conclusion. Look at all the premises. Can you use this sort of reductio argument against them? We will talk more about what those are. I want to go through this. I'll go into more depth with all of these steps in the future lectures. This is just sort of an outline of the things we're going to be going through.